We're still in the middle of this great war that's going on in the Ukraine, and of course, a lot of other things are taking place in the world as well. As a matter of fact, we might be hearing from Steve and Sasha later on, but we did hear that Russia has attacked Ukraine's west for the first time. So they're definitely moving toward the west and all along those lines. And definitely, Harris was recently on a international tour and was letting folks know about the U.S. commitment to NATO and was saying that that was an ironclad commitment. And definitely, Biden has also come out and said that the U.S. will move to revoke most favored nation status for Russia. And apparently, Russia owes the Western banks like around $120 billion. And a lot of folks are saying, well, we can just forget that. We'll probably never get that back. And we can just forget ever thinking that we will ever get it back in that well in that way. So definitely that's a lot of money. I don't even know anybody that's got that kind of cash in their hand and all of that. Well, maybe Elon Musk, but can't think of anybody else that is doing things in that kind of time frame. Gonna bring Chris Gecko in and get some of his insights about what's going on. And like I said, other folks may be joining us as well. We have no idea where Mr. Shaquille is, even though he popped in recently and did let us know that he was at least watching, and hopefully he'll be popping back as well. But they did say that Russian forces launched multiple missile attacks early Friday on a wide range of targets across Ukraine, causing substantial damage in and around the central city of Dnipro, and also attacking airports in the far west of the country, which had previously been spared from the conflict. There was substantial damage to the airport at Lutsk in northwestern Ukraine, some 70 miles from the Polish border. And the governor of the Vulan region said 4 missiles had been fired from a Russian bomber and 2 people were killed. Plumes of smoke also rose from the military airfield at Ivanovo Frankivsk, western Ukraine, which was struck by missiles. So definitely it does look like these attacks are going further and further into the Ukrainian nation and all along those lines. And as a matter of fact, somebody was saying, because apparently one of the things that was attacked was a children's hospital, and some people were asking if that isn't crossing the red line. They have no idea what would be crossing the red line and all
Yes.
along those lines. But that's just some of the things that I've heard about and everything.
Well,
I know that
Mark,
Steve may want to add some other
yeah,
things
well,
into his
I'm
insight.
sorry I was late. It's my first week back in a post-COVID world, so I'm having multiple. My actually today I've got 9 meetings in a row, back to back with no breaks, all the way until 8 o'clock tonight on a Friday. So it's amazing how people are now meeting in person and everything. So it's crazy. But I'll do my monologue at the end and my closeout, whatever I prepared today. And real quickly to get the conversation started. Um, I will say that I think you pretty much covered everything. The Russian missiles striking 3 cities in western and central Ukraine. Reports of fierce fighting on the outskirts of Kiev. Russia continued its attack on Mariupol, and they didn't capture any major cities this week. And President Biden will be calling for suspending normal trade relations with Russia, which would raise tariffs for many Russian products. I will say I'm going to talk about it in my closeout, but I did have a meeting yesterday. I hosted an event with Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy from Chicago, who came to Cary, North Carolina for an event. He's an Indian American congressman. He's dubbed the name Samosa Caucus, so he's the junior member there, but a rising star serving in his third term. And he got quite emotional when he talked about Ukraine and said that just last week he did a Zoom meeting. He serves on the Intelligence Committee with President Zelensky, and President Zelensky was in a bunker, and you could hear it was just amazing and so surreal. He said, and to see a president of a nation hiding in a bunker, and the fact that there could be assassination attempts on his life, and he's really, really fighting hard. And the Ukrainians are fighting very hard, Congressman Krishnamurthy said. But how long they can hold on, only time will tell. But that's all I have to add. I mean, I'd be interested to know, what Chris thinks as this thing draws out. Um, and I'm going to talk about it at the end of the show today. But the bottom line is that the economy is very damaged now, but obviously Putin is not going to stop. Um, will this become like a long, drawn out kind of never ending war for Russia? Or could it result in, you know, part of Ukraine remaining independent and then part being under the Russian hands, similar to a situation of what happened in Germany after World War II, where you had East Germany and West Germany, right? Now I've heard some issues about that, and I think the city is Lviv. So as long as they can keep Lviv free and safe, that could be like the new holding ground for independent Ukraine, and that Kiev would fall to the Russians. So I don't know. If that's Chris. If you have any insight into that,
Kiev is west of Lviv.
no,
Lviv
Lviv.
was originally Lvov. Lvov was a major airfield used by the Soviets back during the Cold War. And Kiev, and then now it's called Kyiv because that's probably the proper pronunciation, was head of a military. Basically, they had two military districts in Ukraine. One was Odessa, which was located along the coastal area, and the other one was the Kiev military district. So they had like two different military districts that were located as part of the Soviet military district. They had all kind of different military districts. So those two were the closest to basically that were used in the Warsaw Pact area, and yes, that is an interesting. That's an interesting. We go back to India and Pakistan, and I remember, and I just want to go back a while back. I think maybe a week or two ago, Steve, you may have stated something like India and Pakistan. What's going to happen with this situation? They see, maybe Pakistan sees Putin as well. Why don't we take India, or India takes Pakistan? That's a totally different situation. India and Pakistan are both nuclear powers. There's not going to be ever going to be invasion by either Pakistan against India or India against Pakistan. There'll always be shells thrown across the border there. But bottom line is that there will never be anything like Putin had against Ukraine. If Ukraine would have gotten one nuclear weapon, Putin would have had moments to pause there, because Ukraine would have had nothing to lose by launching. So it would have launched them, without even being, there would have been no tentativeness there at all. And as far as red lines go, we're talking now about chemical weapons, using chemical weapons or doing whatever. And chemical weapons are a step that once taken can never be ever be reversed. Once you take chemical weapons and you use them, either Ukraine uses them or Russia uses them. Because I don't know enough about Ukraine from the standpoint of military inventory to know if they have any chemical weapons or not. I doubt that they do, because if they did, they probably would have used it by now. But and how many munitions they have? I hear through some news reports that the Russians are using bariatric bombs, thermobariatric, I think, or thermo. So basically, what happens is that it explodes and releases oxygen, and then secondary explosions use that oxygen as fuel to light up stuff, and basically vaporizes human beings within a certain radius. Now, the reason that they do this type of stuff is we used to have a bomb called the
neutron bomb.
A neutron bomb,
Yeah.
which would basically air explode. And when the air exploded, it would save buildings, but it would basically vaporize all humans within a certain area. And they may be doing this. The Russians may be doing this to save buildings, so they can reuse those buildings in a different area, a different method. And the final thing is the maternity. I have no doubt that the media is used by a number of people for emotions, right? It's all about emotions. And you see a maternity hospital being bombed and people, pregnant women being evacuated, and they're saying kids are under rubble and everything else. Right. I mean, that's a heck of a situation. Now, if I were Putin, and I'm thank you, Lord, that I'm not, right, I would say that was never a maternity hospital. That was never a maternity hospital. It was an office building. And what the Ukrainians are doing is they are escorting they're getting pregnant women and they're escorting them out. and they're making it look like it was a maternity hospital.
Hmm.
And, I'm really surprised. And who knows, he may be doing that within Russia itself. But the media can be used as a double-edged sword. It can be used to get emotions for either side of that conflict. And we did it. I mean, it happened in Vietnam. It happened in Korea. It happened in, it happened in Kuwait. We did it there. So
Hey, Chris, Chris, speaking of that double-edged sword, you had mentioned it, and I remember hearing about it when I was a youngster. But a lot of people put that in the sci-fi world. They were like, "There's no way we've actually got a bomb that can evaporate people." Is basically what a neutron bomb is. So, for those that are watching, how much of that was actual reality? Because a lot of people, when they heard that, they're going like, "This has got to be science fiction." But even as you were just saying that, it sounds like it was a very real weapon and a very real concern that folks had of the use of that weapon. Because I do know when I first heard about it, people were like, "This sounds like something straight from Isaac Asimov or one of
yeah,
the great science fiction writers."
it would
Yeah.
release radiation. Basically, it wasn't so much an explosion like what do you call it? A dynamic explosion. It was an explosion that would spread radiation and like a heat radiation. Infrared is radiation.
Right.
Heat is radiation. So basically, what it would do is it would shove that radiation, and you have two types of radiation. You have alpha radiation, and you have beta and gamma. The gamma radiation will go through your body, basically hit your internal organs. The alpha radiation basically is heat. It's just like it never gets past the outer epidermal layer of your body. So those are the things that the neutron bomb did. It would literally just kill people within a certain radius, but it would leave the buildings untouched.
Which actually raises another question that I've always been curious about, and I'd love to know your thoughts about this as well. Is that a lot of the stuff that folks can do, including the folks that are fighting in this war over there in Ukraine and Russia, it seems like that kind of stuff, as well as what terrorists can find, is easily readable on the internet. So I just wondered your thoughts about this as one that even does security analysis. We were actually talking about hate groups earlier, and I'm thinking to myself that, like if you really wanted to have these kind of things going on, it might be too easy to find everything from targets to how to make the weapons right here on this lovely thing we call the internet.
Well, it's even before the internet, if you want to know how to make nitroglycerin, the easiest thing to do is read Mysterious Island by Jules Verne. It tells you exactly the chemical combination to make nitroglycerin. So I mean, it's nothing that prior to the internet, you had a lot of people out there being able to produce. And right now there are suitcase size nuclear weapons, suitcase size, and those are the things that really, really disturb me. And that's why it is so important those terrorists do not get dirty bombs, because man, I'll tell you, they do, and we're in for a heck of a situation ourselves. And I don't mean to take all the time, but one thing that we have to really be careful of in the United States is using this war to further divide this country, because if the situation exists and we can continue to divide this country into regions where people are moving to places where people believe like them, basically what's going to happen is we're going to put ourselves open to invasion.
Yeah.
And we will be invaded. I'm telling you, and when it happens, it's going to happen so quick that we won't even know what hit us.
Speaking of invasions, I did want to bring up one other news story that was world related, and definitely don't want to stay too far off of it and everything, because the Ukraine is probably it is the most important story out there. But at least one American member of the so-called Citgo Six has been released from prison in Venezuela. A lawyer assisted several of the Citgo Six and a spokesman from a Venezuela non-governmental organization that was providing legal assistance to prisoners in the country. Both told one of our major networks and all of that. So apparently this had to deal with 6 former oil executives of the U.S. refinery Citgo, and they've been released from a prison on a few days ago. And definitely it sounds like that's could beef up another part of the world that we've never had the most friendly relationships with and all of that. Or it could be seen as something where they're trying to be a little bit more friendly with us and all along those lines. And apparently we've also had some statements about another part of Latin America that we have all times said that we had interesting relationships with. I guess that's the best way to put it in everything. But apparently, the U.S. will designate Colombia as a major non-NATO ally. So even though I know Colombia has some history with drugs and all of that, I was wondering what our panel thought about these news coming from Latin America and what its impact might be on the global landscape of the world, because definitely I do remember some of the history of Venezuela with oil and all of that. And I'm wondering if some of this kind of actions are not a attempt by Venezuela to let folks know that they are still somewhat in the oil game, and the same with Colombia being designated as a major non-NATO ally, even though we know historically that they have had some issues with some of the drug lords that exist in that country as well. So, in the world of geopolitics, what are some of your thoughts about some of those actions? And like I said, I just heard about these recently, but I was just wondering your thoughts, Chris, and if anybody else has got any thoughts as well. And last but not least, to our northern neighbors, Trudeau has revoked the Emergency Act, saying existing laws are enough to deal with protesters. And I know Sasha is not the biggest fan of Mr. Trudeau, and some other people are not as well. And Colombia has apparently become the latest Latin American country to partially decriminalize abortion. Any thoughts about that from a geopolitical standpoint, Chris?
Yeah. So, thank you. So, thanks, Nick. So basically, it's something like this: Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? So the Colombians, when they were doing drugs, when they were basically manufacturing drugs, they had these big vats, and these vats were filled with caustic chemicals, and they would take the cocaine, and that's what they would do. They take coca and they put in with these hydrosulfuric acid and everything else, and they would make the cocaine, and they were paying these poor people, I mean, like $1 a day or whatever it was. They could feed their family. So they didn't know any better. It was kind of like, hey, look, I can feed my family. Just all I have to do is just put my feet in this stuff and slosh it around, and I'm good, for whatever reason. And I think Colombia never had the ability to get to that, self-evident or self-actualization peak, right? And I think they're getting there. I think with exports of different goods besides cocaine in different areas, I think Colombia is trying to get further up the chain of that Maslow hierarchy of needs. So I think Colombia would be a very strong area. It would be interesting to see how it would balance the power in South America with Venezuela, because Venezuela right now is really kind of a frenemy at this point in time, with this.
Yeah, I went to Venezuela and with my father and during my college and after, and I tell you, it's such a tragedy to see such a great country, so beautiful, just being destroyed, by everything that's been going on. When I was there, Venezuela was a democracy run by a guy named Perez, I think, and it was amazing. But these countries did a lot of import substitution, protectionism, and it just, somehow they lost the stability. And it's just, I don't know what. A lot of Venezuelans are coming into North Carolina, where where I live. A lot are coming here because it's so bad. But it's a beautiful country. I mean, really beautiful. Chorani and Maracaibo Island and Caracas were great. So I think we need a whole policy towards. So we all need to talk about that on an international show. What's the policy on the Southern Hemisphere? We never hear much about Southern Hemisphere. We hear about Israel, Palestine, Middle East, now obviously Russia, Ukraine, China. When did we ever talk about U.S. foreign policy towards Southern Hemisphere?
I think you're thinking Chavez.
I was
Steve.
Chavez.
Yeah.
No, there was a president named Perez.
That was his middle name, Perez. But yeah.
No. There was a President Perez in Venezuela. I'm pretty sure.
Mark, one of Scarlett and Jorge's best friends is the president of Colombia.
Oh, wow.
And he knows about the network. We just never invited him onto the network, but we can talk to Scarlett Jorge because he was considering about getting on one of our shows, but I just haven't reached out to him at all.
I
You
would
know,
love to have him on the
frequent.
show. Speaking of things that we talked
Yeah.
about before, and then we're going to get right to definitely hear from Sasha about both Canada and the Ukraine. But one of the things that I was curious about, and something that you've actually mentioned before and everything, but it came up in CNN today. Apparently, there's a group of folks that have come up with a very unique idea. They are buying an island because they've realized that, hey, they want to
I did see that.
own their own thing and everything. So there's a gentleman named Marshall Mayer who is looking at buying an island over the Caribbean, speaking of South
Right.
America and
Off of
everything.
Belize.
And he is the co-founder of Let's Buy an Island, which is an
Right.
ambitious project that in 2018 set to crowdfund the purchase of an island. So he
Right.
wasn't just buying the island, he was crowdfunding. And apparently there are some things that are still going in that. In early 2022, he is leading the inaugural tour to Coffee Calle as a mixed group of investors and intrigued tourists make landfall on the world's first crowdfunded island. So we have their crowdfunded island that is independently owned. So I'm wondering, to anybody, what is the idea? Because I've heard some other people, even some investors in the African American community and some other communities as well, that have thought about buying their own islands and have done some serious research on it. So how easy is it to buy an island? And Nick, are you buying an island for this network?
Well, what he's trying to do is buy an island for his own country. Okay, so it's not just buying an island, because islands are available all the time. He wants to establish his own country. Now, here's the problem with that, because I already looked into it. The island's only 1.2 miles long. It's not very big. If you're going to do an island country, you want about a 20-mile island, and then you can create your own country. But anyway, that was the thoughts. It's pretty ambitious, but the size of that is really, really small. And so I doubt if it really has any traction. But the thing is, there's islands like Vanuatu, there's small islands. There's Fiji. I mean, that's incredibly small. And they claim to be their own country.
I mean, I ain't got this kind of money, but apparently it don't cost that much.
Yeah, he said it was
it was purchased for $180,000 plus tax, and the sale was completed back in 2019 before COVID-19 put a halt on any of his further plans. So, $180,000 doesn't sound like it's all that much. So maybe Chris and Steve are thinking about buying their own island, and apparently they were having shares on the island, which were only going to cost like $32.50. So he was going to sell shares to the island.
Yeah, you buy shares, now you're owner of the island.
I hate fishing, and I hate sailing, and I hate boats.
Yeah,
I was born and raised in Pittsburgh.
Also, let's face it. Okay, they have an infrastructure problem, because I saw it. It's a desert island. Okay, there's sad things you need, like water, food, shelter. I mean, on a desert island. So, Mark, it's kind of like a pipe dream, and I don't like getting into the pipe. Okay,
I just said that, but apparently, go back to our favorite part of the world, because apparently one of these micronations, because they're called micronations, one of them is in England, and it's called the Principality of Sealand, and it was a World War II fighting platform off the coast of England that was declared an independent nation by its new owners in 1967. But then there's another one that is called the Republic of Eusebis, and it is a neighborhood in Vilnius, Lithuania. It has its own constitution and also has claimed independence. So it seems to me that might be something that folks would be trying to get if they're going past the Ukraine and everything. If we're thinking about Putin and his madman principles and everything, seems to me that an island nation that's run by one or two people would be even much easier to get than Ukraine, where we do know that the people are fighting back.
Let's exile Putin to one of those islands. Like Elba, like Napoleon Elba. We'll just put him there. We'll take him. You won't kill him. We'll take him and we'll put him there. And say, okay, now you're going to have to empty your own sewage. Have a good time with that.
Well, my question about Putin is, you have choices to make. One choice is for him to move toward being part of the European Union, which seems to be a logical choice if you want prosperity for your people. I mean, because if you look at it, that's where Ukraine was moving to, and it looks like it's becoming a prosperous country. Choice number two, get involved with a war with your neighbor. And I don't see the end of this, because even if he occupies Kyiv, which he might win, and take over the city, he is going to they're probably going to have stiff resistance and guerrilla attacks. And in other words, it could be a bloodbath, unlike what he's used to. Well, I guess he is used to because he did that in Syria. In other words, but what this may come as Assyria, but you can see that he may not. I don't know if he cares or not, because if you look at what happened in Aleppo, Aleppo was a nice, prosperous city. Now, of course, these are the reports we get. Maybe it's just one section, but maybe it's the entire city. Looks like it's demolished. It was completely destroyed in a war that Assad had with somebody else. You know, so Ukraine could pull a Russia and do this, because Russia did this years ago with Napoleon. Evacuate, take the 40 million people, 45 million leave. Of course, Putin probably wouldn't mind that, because he'd just go occupy Ukraine. Ukraine has a lot of natural resources, you know, and to say, okay, it's yours, you know, have a good day. Because I don't think, at least the reports I get, I don't think the people are supporting President or Tsar Putin to be king of Ukraine. So I think he's going to run into problems. But also, I believe this isn't going to be over with tomorrow or in the next 10 days. I think this is going to drag on for. It's like the coronavirus. We're going to be talking about this next year. You know, it's
Wait
not
a
going
minute.
to go
Wait
away.
a minute, Nick. You think we're going to be still talking about the coronavirus
Oh,
next year?
Yeah, well, the thing is, coronavirus. I pulled the reports. I haven't done it today, but coronavirus killed another 1,500 Americans. I mean,
the positivity rates are going down, and I think that eventually it'll move to a new phase with an endemic, where it'll be like, you know, flu or anything, but you just have to get your shots, and you know, I think what I'm sensing is that, or I don't know, that's just the way I feel. I don't know how you.
Were they killed
there are
from COVID?
1,559 people who today don't feel your way, because they died because they had COVID-19.
Were they killed with COVID-19
please,
or from
I've heard,
COVID-19?
Okay, listen. I've heard the arguments of the apologist. I call them apologists.
Well, I'm not calling it COVID. I'm changing it to DVOC 91. It's COVID backwards.
Well, whatever. Okay, because here's the apologist thinking.
It sounds
okay,
cool.
Look, you know, if you want to live in a delusional world.
No, that is sad. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let me tell you, Steve. If you want to live in a delusional world, you're welcome to it.
I do live in a delusional world.
I know you do. Most people do. Okay. But the thing is, I like to look at the hard facts. Now, here's how you can delusion yourself. You're going to say, well, they were 80 years old and they had a heart condition. Or I'll delude myself even further. They're 40 years old, but I think they had some diabetes or were overweight. Delude yourself even further. Well, that was a young person. And, you know, even though they were only 5 years old, we weren't sure if they were really in the best condition. Delude yourself even further. Well, these are older people are dying. Who cares about that? Okay. You can delude yourself all you want. But here's the reality of it. Okay. What you're seeing right now, 1559 COVID deaths today. Okay. If you annualize it, we're looking at over 365,000. We're looking worse than the war of Ukraine. And I know that Sasha will jump up and down, and so will Chris and all the right.
I've done the analysis. It doesn't work out that way, Nick.
Well, the thing is, you can do all the analysis you want, Chris. These are the bodies that are in the bags today.
No, I'm talking about forecasting. Forecasting.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
forecasting. You can always forecast. Okay, but if you forecast everything, everybody's dead anyway. But the thing is, at the same time, I like to look at reality, not somebody's version of reality. And I like to believe what you want to believe too. I want to be delusional like you are, because I saw numbers down at 300 and 200, and I was sitting there right agreeing with Chris Greco. I was going, look at these numbers. They're down to 300 and 200. Chris is right. And then guess what happens? It popped back up again. I can't.
7-day averaging.
Really quickly.
May I say, it's such a great thing for the Republicans that you have, in fact, jumped ship and joined the Democrats, because as a lawyer with no real experience of the real world, your version of reality works very well with the Democrats.
It's true. It's true, because my reality is based on.
I was quite interested yesterday watching the show. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get on all week. Everyone, stop emailing me. Yes, I had a few communication problems. I'm back. Thank you. But I love the good old Mark over there, who said, he talked about Imagine once again by John Lennon. Yes, imagine there's no countries. You know, imagine there's no religion. Imagine no possessions. What a wonderful world that would be. No, that sounds like absolute hell. That sounds like hell. And every time you've tried that, every time it's been tried, it's failed. Case in point, Venezuela. Beautiful, wonderful country. What did they do? Let's redistribute wealth. Let's get rid of all the productive people in our country. Let's turn everything over to government. And look what happened. And why, oh, why? Do you want to have
if you listen to the lyrics, Shaquille, hold on a second. Hold on. I'm not going to let Shaquille off that.
Got a good point
If
there.
you listen, hold on a second, just really quickly. Shaquille, if you listen to the lyrics are actually, and he even said it when he was living, it's like an idealistic viewpoint of what would happen if we had some of these division points, and religion is definitely a division point. Nationalism is definitely a division point. If those were not actually engaged in the American or the world ideal. So it's even he was saying it's a very idealistic kind of song because you're like saying that there is no religious division, there's no of this other stuff happening. So he wasn't even saying it was very much possible, but it would be like an ideal world.
Hey, Mark,
last time you brought this up, that's why I brought this up last time we quoted that song. I brought this up. You said the same thing. The problem is, I don't consider that to be an idealistic world because I consider that to be absolute hell. Okay, I mean, anybody who wants to think about utopias, they'll talk about 1984 or Ayn Rand's ridiculous new world that she created in Atlas Shrugged. But just go way back and read The Republic by Plato, and you'll just say that these utopian ideas don't work, and that doesn't work. It sounds terrible. It sounds horrible.
I agree with Shaquille. We should have some new lyrics to it. Imagine there's no COVID. And Chris Gregor could write the lyrics. Imagine there's no deaths. Imagine there's no deaths, even though 1,500 people died.
I just said.
Imagine. COVID walks away. Come on, Chris, write the lyrics.
We'll write the lyrics right here on the show.
Imagine if the US didn't fund these sorts of things. Now, I'm hearing that, oh my goodness, has the United States government funded some biological research laboratories in the Ukraine that they're now worried might fall into Russian hands? Did they do that again? And I'll just come back to something else. So there's all this criticism of Donald Trump for weakening NATO. Now, I've just gone back and watched those tapes. One of his core complaints against Germany was, hey, Germany, you weren't in a really great condition when NATO first started. Your economy is amongst the world's biggest right now. Right. Is there any particular reason why the US taxpayer is having to pay disproportionate amounts of money into NATO to protect you from Russia at the same time that you're buying billions of dollars of oil from Russia? Maybe you should buy it from somebody else. Maybe you should buy it from a more friendly country. And you should certainly be contributing more to NATO. And didn't Donald Trump get criticized? Okay. And now we have Joe Biden. I find this fascinating. I'm hoping that one of you lefties over there can explain this to me. Now we have this situation. We've had it for a while now where Biden's over there pleading with OPEC nations to increase their production of oil. Well, what about countries that are close to the United States? If they want more oil, can they plead with America to increase their production? Even if you don't want it domestically.
We just mentioned that before you got on because we talked about Venezuela and what the relationship is.
You're going to ask all these other countries to increase theirs, and you go, look, this is a really bad idea. Okay, really bad. Try to buy oil from Russia when Russia causes this grave threat to the West. Terrible idea. We've got a much better idea. Let's buy our oil from Venezuela, not Texas. Venezuela. Let's buy our oil not from Alaska, but from Iran. And while we're at it, let's give Iran a nuclear deal. So, can someone explain to me the logic on that one? Because
I do have a question for both of y'all, because I do remember that when Venezuela had a very leftist person in the politics, one of his tactics.
That's how it is right now.
No, but I'm just saying, but one of his tactics, and I would not be surprised if the new governor or the new president of Venezuela doesn't try it again. But when Chavez was in charge, he did try to make an appeal to the minority community that he would give them tax breaks and other kind of breaks because of what was going on at that time. I would not be surprised if that strategy is not redone and everything. And Chris can explain that tactic because I think it was during the time that you were in the military and everything. But I do remember that he made an appeal toward some of the minority communities like Detroit and other places. I want to say that was in the 80s or 90s. Am I correct, Chris? If I'm remembering
Well,
my
he
facts.
he was trying to come over to the United States to give speeches, and they said, "No, you're not going to get, you're not going to come here to give speeches. So you stay in Venezuela." But interestingly enough, Mark, we used to have an exercise back in 1980, 81, an exercise, and I forget what it was called, but it was basically a southern an invasion by Venezuela against the United States southern area, and how we would go against that invasion by Venezuela. And that was 1980. So it was, so this situation with Venezuela has been around for, for decades. And I think it's always going to be that way. It's just going to be, but we got
speaking of that situation with Venezuela, I did want to mention one other thing to come back to Shaquille's favorite song that he doesn't like. One of the other songs, and we were talking about this earlier, was Imagine a World with No Hatred.
And I just sing this song at school. And then when I got to about 9 or 10, and I thought, hang on just a minute. So I started to realize how ridiculous leftism was when I was about 9 or 10.
I got you. I hear what you're saying. And
He hates the Beatles.
Going
the Beatles
to
thumb their nose
it was very much.
Well, the Beatles didn't. The Beatles didn't went behind that. That was just John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And but look, if you guys think that being high as a kite on drugs is a great lifestyle, go for it. Hey, I'm all for legalizing drugs, but please don't tell me that people that are as high as a kite are great world philosophers. And anyone who tells me that the Beatles weren't on drugs, how the hell did they write Yellow Submarine?
Nobody said that they weren't on drugs, but I did have a question for you based on what you just said, because one of the lyrics was "Imagine a world without any hatred," and I'm going to go back down south and everything because we think about sports and everything, and then I also want to hear from something that me and Chris were talking about earlier, which was about the hate groups here in the United States. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Mexico, because apparently Mexico had a big soccer match and the fans went into a whole thing. So is that going to be, do you have like any, not, I have a problem with this when not just the players, we don't know that happens in sports all the time, but the fans are over there having a fight in the middle of the stands. And that happened in Mexico last weekend. I'm sure it'll happen again probably this weekend. But I was just wondering, because that's the kind of thing that he was trying to sing against in my mind.
Can't we, Chris, don't you have a report on how COVID's going to disappear that you've been holding on for a week?
But let me get some, Nick, you and I, we're gonna have it out with this COVID thing.
Yeah, because the thing is, I really want to support you in your delusion, because I feel free to travel again. But every time I get the reports back, it's like you're saying, hey, nobody died, then 1,500 people died.
No, I said,
hey, it's going away.
Do they die with COVID or do they die from COVID? That's what I said. If they die with COVID or from COVID, like, do they die with the flu? What's the number one underlying condition for COVID? Number one underlying condition, Nick. There's been a study on this. So
is it diabetes or something like that?
That's what you would think. Hypertension.
Okay.
Hypertension is the number one underlying condition.
Right.
So basically what happens is if you get the idea of getting COVID is everyone's going to get COVID. We're all going to get COVID. But what happens from there has to do with vaccinations, has to do with different aspects about, antivirals and all those other things that go along with that. And I said, and I told you this, data, you're right. Data can be fooled. It can be messed with on both sides. You can sit back and say, how much is each hospital getting? And this is conspiratorial, and I get it. How much is each hospital getting for each patient that has COVID? Are they getting a federal subsidy for treating COVID patients? If they are, then what, as a hospital administrator, what am I going to do? Even if COVID is a secondary infection, I'm going to say they got COVID. I want the full federal subsidy so that we can spread that out through the hospital to increase all the care for all patients. And nobody's ever answered that question. I cannot do that, right? So it's a situation. Again, deaths to me are sitting back going, I don't want anybody to die, but I don't want anybody to die from the flu. 160,000 people, 160,000 died from the flu. 35 million people got the flu in 2019. Did we have,
Well,
did we go nuts to that?
But
No.
one thing we haven't talked about, and we're going to get back to some domestic issues as we get towards the tail end of the show. But we one thing we haven't talked about is that you're more predisposed to get COVID if you're immunocompromised or older, right? Or obviously if you haven't been vaccinated. Right. But one thing we have not talked about, and I do think it's legitimate, is that if your immune system is compromised, you could have a number of reasons why. You could have diabetes, you could have cardiovascular disease, you could have fatty liver disease, you could have, believe it or not, low testosterone levels, which I actually represent a company that's manufacturing testosterone product, and testosterone levels actually for men, if they are adequate, can actually prevent a lot of those comorbidities. So,
but then the person ends up with toxic.
No, I understand that.
What I'm saying though is that people are dying from COVID, but the people that are dying from COVID might be their immune systems may be compromised rather than someone that's fit and eating healthy and everything, right? So I'm not saying that it's not sad, but we're not having enough of a conversation. Our healthcare system in America is a test and treat system. It's not a preventive care system.
We need to address this issue that Chris brought up. Counselor Chris, can you bring any evidence, any law that supports your allegations that hospitals are incentivized to put down COVID as a death, as opposed to other things? Any evidence at all, Counselor?
No.
Okay,
Let me
tell you something.
I can provide you that evidence.
Your case is thrown out of court. Your case is out of court.
I agree.
I can provide you that evidence.
I think he's got good evidence.
That's easy.
You got to bring evidence.
It's been well known for a long time that the hospitals were paid extra for treating or for having a COVID patient.
Bring evidence forward.
And if you remember during 2020,
I don't see any.
If you remember during 2020, the United States had a miraculous thing happen where hardly anybody in the country died from heart disease. It was incredible. There should have been a study on it. What did America do in 2020 that made the country so healthy? Because heart disease is one of the leading causes of death.
Rather than ramble on,
except for the United States, we had no heart disease deaths, but you had all these COVID deaths.
Hey, Nick.
Bring evidence, Counselor. You're like a Trump.
I've done some previous shows.
Bring evidence. Trump got thrown out.
I have given them to you
because he can't bring evidence. You make what they call spurious allegations with no evidence. You get thrown out of court so fast. Makes your head spin. So when I see Chris say this,
hold on a second.
Shaquille, you say that you guys are right.
Nick, hold on 1 second. I do have one question, and it's for both you and Shaquille. It may actually be one of the few times that me and Shaquille actually agree, even though that's not true. We agree on a lot of different things. But one of the things that I will say, and I think Shaquille may agree, is that because there's a lot of them right here in the Research Triangle Park area. Can we not say that part of what is going on is the power of the pharmaceutical industry? The pharmaceutical industry is definitely making some money off of what is going on, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. But that is one of the things that I am concerned about with what is happening, is the nature of the research and the nature of the pharmaceutical industry in general. And the pharmaceutical is like one of the top 3, NRA being another one, lobbies in the world and in the country for sure.
But before we go on, let's address Shaquille's second spurious allegations. He said they weren't reporting any heart disease deaths. I'm pulling the CDC, just read it. 659,000 deaths for heart disease. So you say none, the CDC says 659. Again, Shaquille, you are making spurious allegations before this court without any evidence. Not only that, it's completely not true.
I brought the evidence up on previous shows.
You don't allegations.
You don't have any evidence at all to back up your claims either.
I do. It's right here in the CDC.
No, you don't have any
evidence
to back up your claims.
Right here in the CDC.
And the reality is that when you look at the excess mortality rates in 2020 and in 2021, yes, there were more deaths in both years than on average, but the difference in the amount of deaths reported was not so significant as to attribute COVID as being this tremendously terrible thing. Now, of course, COVID's a problem, but the excess mortality rates were not that significantly higher than what you would generally expect to see year on year.
All right, now that we're done with the COVID thing,
Well,
I have to get
obviously
to another
Monday
issue.
is
There's
in.
one of
Well, I do have evidence, Nick.
Nick's
Just
other
thought I'd
favorite
tell you.
issues, and one of Shaquille's other favorite issues. I'm glad that you're back, Shaquille. Everything I've been missing you, but it's actually come to something that we said earlier before you got here, and I would love to hear your thoughts after Chris talks about it, because apparently. I know you say the U.S. is a great country, and I agree. It is a great country, but there's a whole lot of hate groups around here. And Chris just talked about the hate group study that he just recently saw, and I'd love to hear more about this so our audience can hear about it as well. Chris, it's on you.
Oh, so
yes, Chris, tell me about how hateful and horrible America is, please.
well, you know, the thing is, it's the Southern Poverty Law Center. The media, and I was just talking to Mark about this. The media brings out the the idea that we have all these white supremacist and anti-Semitic and everything else groups that are tracked in the United States, and the SPLC I think does an excellent job of presenting this. And I'm trying to make a proposal for a show that talks about data that is presented in the media, and then present that data and say, look, there's more to the story than just one side of the story. So what I was telling Mark was, yes, there are white supremacists. There are, hate groups that, talk about white nation aspects and white nationalism and all that. And there are, on the opposite side, the Nation of Islam and, black nationalists and, black hate groups and anti-Semitic groups that are black, that are black, have a black membership. And but the bottom line is that the SPLC, if you just take a look at the site, does a great job of not just presenting each group, but all the different history behind it and what they've done. And it's funny because at one point, I was telling Mark, at one point, the Nation of Islam contacted Richard Spencer, who's in charge of the white nationalist group, and said, hey, we have so much in common. We want a black nation and you want a white nation. Let's talk about this and figure out how we can, split the nation to do whatever. And Spencer says, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So they were about to get ready until the two memberships said, no, we're not talking to these people. That's, we talk this way. So we're not going to do that. So it's a good, solid look at all these different groups and where they exist in the United States. And I got to tell you, Shaquille, it's funny because and I'm kind of glad of this in a way, but I was driving down the road and there's a high school, and right across from this high school, there's a, let's go Brandon sign and, all these Confederate flags. And this one flag was there. And my daughter, who's a active duty Air Force officer, she goes, Dad, what flag is that? I said, that's the Klan flag. And she goes, well, that looks a lot like the North Carolina flag. And I said, yeah, it kind of does, but it's not the Klan. It's the Klan flag. And this guy evidently is a wizard or he's something having to do with the Klan, but he put up a Klan flag. And it's kind of a shame that she didn't recognize that, but it's also kind of good in a way because she wasn't brought up with that thrown in her face, every single day type thing, like basically I was, especially as an Italian. My father was Italian, and the Klan didn't really like him either. It was like, a little bit too dark skinned for them, type thing. But so we never had crosses burnt on the lawn, but we had little warnings, on our trees and stuff, like. So
that's a really interesting point, right? So your daughter didn't even know what the flag was.
Yes, good thing. Yeah,
that's a good thing. And
this is what's happening in America, right? There's a generation of people which thankfully have no idea what racism means. They have no idea what oppression actually means. They have to invent stuff, right? Like Cory Bush and some of that crew in the Democrats, they invent stuff and the way they string it together. So the big energy companies have pulled oil out of the ground, and oil has been a leading cause of climate change. And climate change disproportionately affects people of color. Therefore, the oil companies did so because they wanted to be racist. It's just, therefore, we're all oppressed unless we all go to electric vehicles.
Shaquille, you are totally misrepresenting what some of those arguments were. The arguments were actually, I can give you two examples. I can give you two specific examples. In Texas, they actually put oil refineries that were polluting. I believe it was Texas, but definitely in that region and everything that were in specifically minority communities. They did the same thing in Detroit. That's the whole thing about the water and everything along those lines. And when I was living in Warrenton, North Carolina, they intentionally dumped in what they considered both poor and, in a lot of cases, minority communities. That was done intentionally. I can't remember the letters because I always get them and the drug mixed up, whether it's PCB or PCP. But definitely was one of those.
Hang on, just hang on a second. Were they all poor areas, and some of them were also occupied by minorities? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that when
you're not saying, for example, hang on. You're not saying, for example, that they looked at certain areas and said, "Wow, this area is a minority area, and it's really wealthy, but it's a minority area, so we're going to dump it there." No,
I'm saying that for decades, they have intentionally targeted African American communities, including with the highways.
Mark, they dumped it in poor areas. Just stick to that topic before you go back onto racist roads. They dumped it in poor areas, and some of those areas were predominantly occupied by minorities. So some of those areas were predominantly occupied by white people then, as well.
In that particular case, I have said that it was both a class and a race issue. But in the case of the roads, then that was done intentionally in the Pacific African American communities. In the case of some housing communities, that was done in specifically African American communities. In the case of the banking, that was done in specifically African American communities. So we can go all and on about these things in terms of what were specific African American communities, including in the 21st century of the year 2022. So don't even go with me on that. And I can bring, I can bring some evidence and everything along those lines. I will gladly send you some reports that have talked about this for a number of decades, and I will gladly do that. Or I will have some friends of mine do that for you, including the wealth disparity that you also don't believe exists as well. So definitely there are some things that exist, including race issues where they're dealing with the wealth disparity. I was going to come back to something Chris said. That's not the first time that. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. I'll let you defend yourself. That's not the first time that nationalists have met. Hold on. Let me finish. That's not the first time that nationalists have addressed meeting with each other either, because American Indian movement also, which was some people would consider that a nationalist organization as well, or hate group, has met with both some of the people with Malcolm X and some of those groups that would be considered black nationalists. And I want to say they might have met with some white nationalists, but I know that AIM definitely met with some fellow black nationalists as recently as the whole time that was going on with Wounded Knee, the more recent Wounded Knee, not the historical one. Right. Well, they're both historical now.
Mark, I did wait. So I just want to come back to, without going on to all this other stuff you brought up, banking and wealth and all the way, just going back to that one issue. You said it was class and racism. But it can't be class and racism if the common thing about all the areas were poor, right? Then it's probably more about the areas being poor than about racism, because clearly if only some of those areas were occupied by minorities, then some of those areas were also occupied by white people predominantly.
The majority of the communities that I am talking about were minority communities, so I think that it had to do with both race and class. The two can be interrelated issues. So in this case, I think that they are interrelated, just like I think they are interrelated with the wealth disparity. So I actually think that they can be interrelated. They don't have to be separately related. Both classism and racism are issues in the United States.
Mark, how come it doesn't happen to rich black areas? If it happens to poor black areas and to poor white areas, and it doesn't happen in rich black areas and it doesn't happen in rich white areas, but
that's what I'm saying. And that's where the race aspect plays in, because in the case of Michigan, it definitely hit some of the rich black areas as well. As the cases in Texas, it hit in the rich black areas as well. So in that case, it was an issue where it was hitting because of race issues, because definitely Flint and a couple of those other places, and I think Dearborn have some really decent wealth in there.
Flint was a rich area. There was a whole heap of black ultra millionaires, one percenters living around Flint back in the day. In Flint's heyday,
there are some areas that have been hit, including an area that has a large Asian population as well, that have been hit by some of these ones that are more racially based, and definitely because there's a large like Indian and I think some Muslim population in parts of the area of Michigan that were hit by the water controversy and all of that. So definitely there are places where it is hit that are both rich and class issues, and then there are some that are maybe more class issue oriented. But I think that the two are oftentimes interrelated, and you want to make them separately related.
No,
Yeah,
I just don't think it's all about race. That's simple as that. Steve.
Guys, yeah, it's okay. Mark, you let me know when my closeout's going to be a little longer than usual because it's my monologue. So just
Yeah, you get ready to go for it now, because I've actually got to get ready to bounce over and talk Ukraine to Sasha and everything, because we're doing our Friday Sasha show. Are you going on that, Chris? I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if it's just.
I have a 11 o'clock with economics.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. Well, go ahead and put me on the solo screen as I close out. No last jab, just some comments about economic sanctions. I want to thank everyone for being with us today on Pod TV on Roku TV network. And today, my closing remarks, my last look or take, as Fareed Zakaria calls in his show. It's not really a jab, it's the last perspective as the host of this show, is economic sanctions. In Britain, they banned business operations of Chelsea, which is owned by Roman Abramovich, one of the oligarchs who's very close ally to Putin. They've banning ticket sales, merchandise sales, and it's another example of an economic war that is being waged as we speak. Britain, the United States, and the European Economic Union are all taking extreme measures against Russia. A couple of these measures are cutting off Russian banks from international financial markets, which is going to make it very hard for Russians to get loans and strap out cash out of the system. McDonald's, Starbucks, Netflix, Goldman Sachs, Amazon, the list goes on of big companies that are ceasing operations or pulling out of Russia. And also nations are stopping exports to Russia, which will affect supply chains even further, affecting manufacturers of cell phones and technology and those kinds of things. Now, this economic war, obviously the ruble is down by 40%. And many economists are saying that Russia could be down for 3 to 4 years, but Putin continues to wage the war. Perhaps going against the oligarchs isn't enough, and they need to make sure that they're doing sanctions that are affecting Russia's economy, which will hurt many innocent Russian civilians and citizens out there who will be in desperate need of help and assistance. My final thought is this. The two things that we're not doing is stopping Europe's buying oil and gas from Russia, which is its largest revenue source. And so we have not really stopped that yet. And that is something that could really, really damage Russia. And other big companies like Hyatt, Marriott, Halliburton, Citigroup are still not pulling out of Russia. At the end of the day, sanctions usually only work 1/3 of the time. They didn't work in 2014. Maybe they will this time, not to end the war, but to damage Russia severely, teach them a lesson, and weaken them so immensely. Now, what's interesting is that if Russia falls economically and then their military gets strapped because of a war that is longer than they think, perhaps the one to gain in this arena is China, who will then be even closer to being the world economic superpower. We will see, folks. But as I close out this show, as I've said always, we pray for the people of Ukraine. Yesterday, when Congressman Krishnamurti got emotional or could not believe what he saw, a president of a democratic nation in a bunker, afraid for his life. This is maniacal dictatorship at its worst. And we just hope that we can continue to supply ammunitions to Ukraine, and just hope that eventually our European allies, whether they join NATO, which probably won't happen, or the European Union, can assist them. Because right now, the Ukrainian people are defending democracy to their dying last breath. And we pray for them today. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best. And we'll see you on Monday on Pod Roku TV. Thank you.